Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 229.
And this week, it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, at the moment I have peace and quiet. But I would just like to warn the listeners that we might have some background noise of sanding from my neighbour. I won't go into any more detail other than to say I have had an absolute gutful of building noise from my neighbours. You can probably tell that by the tone of my voice. Putting on a smile, but yes, it's not very nice living here at the moment. So if you do hear something in the background, that's what it is. I do have a mic that usually cancels it out. So we shall see how it goes. What I have for you from a podcast point of view is our good friend Jim Kwik. So it's a Kwik Brain episode. I knew I'd be a little bit pushed for time, and also I haven't listened to his podcast for a while, so I thought it would be good to have a bit of a trawl through to see what took my fancy. And I think I only had to go down an episode or two before I spotted this one, which is called The Neuroscience of Manifestation: Why You Should Focus on Brain Networks and Nervous System Regulation with Dr. James Doty. And quick bio here, Dr. Doty is a neurosurgeon and faculty member of Stanford School of Medicine, has been since 1997. Among his many achievements, he's dedicated part of his career to exploring the mysteries of the brain. And the book he is on Jim's show to talk about is called Mind Magic: The Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything. Now, the reason this episode caught my eye is because it's something I've always been deeply skeptical about. So I thought, well, yeah, interesting. And they're talking about, they seem to be saying they're going to be focusing on actual science here. So let's give it a listen and see what they have to say. And funnily enough, there are all sorts of things you'll hear about when I tell you there are things that you say. So they did make a lot of sense. So they're talking about this thing called manifestation from a neuroscience perspective. And Jim kicks off by asking Dr. Doty to define manifestation. And so he defines it as the ability to embed within your subconscious an intention or goal. The key is how you do that such that there is the greatest likelihood of it actually happening. And he says the term is popular, but mostly associated with woo-woo or pseudoscience. And I think, that's where, I'm all for a bit of woo-woo, but I'm also deeply skeptical. So I definitely fall into that. Yeah. Well, it sounds interesting, but it also sounds a little bit like magic and fairy dust. He says, look, that's not to say that there aren't some useful techniques, but that there needs to be more information about why you are doing it and exactly how to do it. And apparently, in his book, there's a 6-step program that does just that. It teaches you how to maximize your potential to manifest. So Jim goes on to ask what role the brain and our nervous system plays in manifestation on reaching these goals. And Dr. Doty says that our brain is far more powerful than most people realize. And this has been shown through many neuroscience studies, particularly related to things like meditation or training your brain. He says the most typical definition of manifestation is that you send out some sort of energy and the universe decides whether you're worthy to receive what you're trying to manifest. That's the woo-woo bit that I'm skeptical of. He says there are 2 problems with this. One, it's not true. So, okay, I'm good. I'm going to carry on listening to this guy. Number 2, in some cases, especially when the term law of attraction is used, the implication is that if you don't get whatever it is, it's somehow your fault and you're to blame for not being able to make it happen. And the other common aspect of manifestation is that you manifest for yourself and what you want. He says that the problem with this is that it diminishes your ability to do that. The reason for this is most of us are coming from a state of comparison in a society that has defined what success means. So we tend to seek external affirmation based on things we think we need to have or that we need to be. And one of the problems with this is that we might be in a fear state. And this activates the sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze response. And being in this state limits your ability to have full access to various cognitive brain networks, which allow you to manifest the best. And Jim had asked if we need to be in a calm state. And Dr. Doty says, yeah, definitely, yes. You need emotional regulation and to be in the right mental state. What is that mental state? Engagement of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest. And this is when our cognitive brain networks function the best, but also our peripheral physiology functions the best too. And of course, we've evolved this way for good reasons, but it's not best suited to help us in modern society. We bang on about this all the time, don't we? So when we are in this survival mode, which is quite often a lot of the time, it kind of holds us hostage, Jim says, from the areas that would work better for us. Executive functioning, problem solving, creativity, imagination. Jim goes on to ask him about brain waves and what role they might play in manifestation, as well as electromagnetic field of the heart, which apparently he talks about a lot in the book. And so Dr. Doty says that, talking about brain waves, when we're awake or when we're highly focused, that's activating our beta or gamma waves, whereas sleep, insight, meditation activates our delta and theta waves. But because of the skull, there's a limitation as to how far outside our brains these frequencies extend. But apparently the heart is a little bit different. The heart has an input and output from our vagus nerve, which holds our autonomic nervous system. So that's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. And this heart electromagnetic energy extends 3 to 5 feet outside of our body. And he says that you've probably experienced this being around certain people. You might say something like, you can feel their positive energy. They have this presence that makes you feel good about yourself. And that's because they are releasing their own positive energy that they carry with them. And this, he says, is the power of our brain to create that environment. But he says it's a bit like running a marathon. You don't just run a marathon because you decided you were going to. You have to build habits to get you there. And manifestation is the same. You start with simple tasks, he says, and I'm assuming he's talking about some of the steps in his book. You learn the habit of focusing your intention and you practice this until it feels very natural. And he says this is pretty easy to do. You just have to learn the steps to do it. And Jim asks him if he practices mindfulness and meditation regularly to help him with this manifestation practice. He laughs. He says he's been doing this for 50 years, so he has developed quite a few shortcuts. But it comes down to creating habits and creating habits that become a part of who you are. And he says there are a couple of things we really need to understand about manifestation. Many people have habits and behaviors that interfere with their lives based on the baggage that they carry from childhood. And these habits we carry with are unconscious, but they can have a huge effect on every decision we make. The other thing is the clarity of your intention. What is it that you really want? So getting away from the desiring of stuff. I want more money, a bigger house, whatever. He says we've evolved as a species to care for our offspring, And we've been rewarded for that with a release of hormones like oxytocin. And basically, when we care about others, we feel good. And that shifts us into the parasympathetic nervous system. We benefit, but we also benefit others. It changes how we see the world and often also what we desire, because it taps into purpose and meaning. But he says, I want to go back to the practical aspects of how we manifest. He says that through our sensory organs, we are bombarded with about 10 million bits of information a second, but we're only able to process consciously about 50 to 100 bits. So tiny fraction. We are able, though, on a conscious level, to embed our intention into our subconscious, but we have to be in the right mental state to do that. What happens then is this has an impact on an area of the cognitive brain network called the default mode network. This is self-referential. It's usually associated with things like daydreaming or mind wandering. This is where we create the narrative of who we are or want to be. And this compares to the task positive network, which is the action portion of taking what is in our subconscious and having our conscious manifest that. And what that included is something called our salience network. How do we make something salient to us? Once we do that, lots of networks here. This then activates our attention network. We focus our attention. And then this results in our executive control network being activated to realize that intention. It all gets a bit complicated. I quite think I might want to read this book and find out more of the details. But he gives the example, this makes it a lot easier to see what he's talking about. He gives the example of being at a really noisy party. But if your name is mentioned, you tune into that straight away, despite all this noise and stuff going on around you. And that's because your identity as to who you are is deeply embedded in you, and your subconscious is always attuned to that. And this is what you do in the context of manifesting. You embed something deeply so that your subconscious is always on the alert for any opportunity to make that connection to manifest your intention. Jim asks him, so what obstacles tend to get in the way of people successfully manifesting? And he goes back to this carrying this baggage from childhood, not understanding the baggage you carry and how that interferes with your life and decisions that you make. Negative self-talk or a lack of self-compassion. This is when I started thinking, these are things I hear from Terry all the time. And this, he says, is due to negativity bias and the stickiness of negativity. If you tell yourself you're not worthy, something's not possible, you can't do whatever it is, that becomes your truth. Because your brain doesn't have the ability to sort between truth and untruth. It only listens to what you tell it. He says this is why a lot of people have given away their self-agency, because they listen to other people or are influenced by situations that limit their beliefs. I see all these phrases coming up. I say, yeah, I heard Terry talking about that in a masterclass the other day. So he says you have to have an unshakable belief in your own possibility to train your mind to do what many will tell you is impossible. And he talks a bit about his own experience of growing up apparently in poverty with an alcoholic father and a mother who was impaired by stroke and depression. And he said that he was helped by somebody who taught him a brain training exercise and visualization technique, and that really changed the trajectory of his life. Jim asks, is it important to learn how to work with fear? You know, things like carrying around this baggage and regret. And Dr. Doty says that the fear narrative created is often far worse than the actual event. And we need to understand this. We need emotional regulation. Understanding how reactive you are is important. And I always laugh to myself whenever I hear reactive, because it's, said this before. I'm reactive, Lila's reactive. Similar techniques, only hers involves more chicken than mine. But he quotes Viktor Frankl, and I seem to remember, I think this is a quote that you've mentioned before, but between stimulus and response is a pause. And within that pause lies your freedom. He says that we need to understand how fear works and how much fear limits us and creates these limiting beliefs. It creates a barrier then to what you're able to accomplish. So he said, the key is liberating yourself from fear. He talks about being able to have a calmness about you and being able to sit and not get lost in thinking about the fear, rather being present for what is happening in the moment versus creating a narrative you're creating for the future. And yeah, I get that. I do that a lot. Catastrophize and perseverate in downward spirals. A lot of that going on. I blame you a bit. You put this into my mind with your sleep tips last week when you said one of the problems with waking up in the middle of the night and going over and over your problems, and then you have to try and set a time the next day. And I'm sure you put that idea into my mind because I've been doing that every night now. But anyway, it's a Jim Kwik episode, and he is very good at having someone on talking about their book and just giving you enough to tease you, but often leaving you wanting to know a lot more. And from the starting point of picking the episode, because it was something I was very skeptical about, I actually left the episode feeling like I would like to know an awful lot more of what Dr. Doty has to say, especially as it tapped into things that I hear you talking about a lot and find helpful, the things that you share. So yes, I might well invest in the book and find out a bit more about this mind magic of manifestation.
One of the things I really like about what you've shared, Daisy, and obviously I have not listened to it, nor have I read the book, but I'm kind of interested in all of this. And I do hold some kind of woo-woo beliefs around this. But what I like about the way you described it is there is science to it. And I think for so many people who almost want to be able to believe in manifestation, but just can't because it feels so woo-woo, I think...
Yeah, that's me.
I think this makes it so much more reachable. There are things about this that fit, and I can affect what I invite in, but I don't have to go into this just, suspending all disbelief and go into this other realm that feels too woo-woo for me. So I love that you are the one that found this topic, because I think it's so connecting with why it's important that we all could benefit from this concept of manifestation without all having to also, kind of ascribe to this more woo-woo way of seeing it.
Yes, and Jim actually said at one point that there were benefits from reading this book and maybe, following the steps and building the practice, not even for the goal of manifestation, but just from a general sort of health and wellness perspective and getting into better frame of mind. So yes, I quite like the fact that they were saying, there is a part of this, let's sort of strip away the woo-woo magic pill fairy dust side of it. And actually what's underneath, there is some science behind it, but it comes down to this, a marathon is run on the back of lots of small steps and practices that are built up to give you the strength to be able to run a marathon. And it sounds like, yes, this practice, what he's talking about, the practice of manifestation, is the same thing. It's something that you've got to work at, and you've got to create habits towards, and you've got to be in the right frame of mind. It's not just, writing your greatest wish on a bit of paper and throwing it out there in the world and hoping the fairies will deliver it. That's, so it just sort of brings it back more into the realism of it's something that's actually going to take some work, but it is possible.
Absolutely. Anything from this episode that you feel like is a quick takeaway, something that you can start practicing right away?
No, not really, is the answer to that, because they didn't really sort of give away those kind of tips. The most they got into was the bit where they started talking about that first step of sort of setting your intention. That's the closest they got to the sort of nitty-gritty of it, really. No, I mean, the takeaway from it was really that I would like to find out what his 6-step program is. And I like the fact that it sounds like there are some, it's broken down into small practical steps that anyone can achieve. So there's no actionable takeaway, but it sparked the interest. I want to find out more about this.
Which sometimes I think is the most important thing we get from some of these episodes, is that it really grabs us and makes us want to dig deeper.
Definitely. So I will let you know.
Very good. I also will say that if your audio gets rid of all the background sound, I think our listeners will be missing out, because at times during this, while you were speaking, it sounded like you were on the scene of a Star Wars episode. There were some sounds that sounded like Chewbacca kind of making his, well, I can't do it, that noise, and the hovercrafts, and going into that bar with all the different sounds and stuff. So I think there's some really interesting things. If you can't edit those out, I hope our listeners enjoy.
I certainly hope they enjoy them more than I do.
Right.
Well, until next time, when I hope there's a bit more peace and quiet, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
Take good care, everyone.